the freedom of Liverpool on the same day as Klopp in 2022, and David Morrissey, also an active Liverpool fan, you know both of them very well, who was at the game yesterday and who in 2020 narrated a documentary called Jurgen Klopp, Germany's greatest export. Good morning to you both.
Good morning.
Sue, he completely revitalised the club, didn't he?
Oh gosh, yes. He brought us back from the doldrums. He's just the most extraordinary man, the most charismatic person I think I've ever met.
What made him so charismatic, you think?
Just his humanity, I think. He was his humour, his care. He just. I mean, he did slot. I hate to use that word. He just became. I don't know. We were recognisable in the city of humour and wit. He just fitted. You know, he does it. He does it seamlessly, that if you meet him, you're immediately struck by his genuine warmth. And that, I think, is what sort of went through the club. That everyone there yesterday, you know, the staff, which I know because I go regularly, the staff were in tears, everybody, right? You know, the bar staff in the rooms, they all love him.
Yeah. Extraordinary season anthem yesterday, wasn't it? And David, let me just ask you, what made him Germany's greatest export, David?
Well, you know, it was like Sue said, it was just a great fit. You know, he came to over a time when we needed some new energy, and he gave it to us. And you know, it's true that he did that with the first team, but it was throughout the club, and you could feel it on the ground. You know, like Sue said, wherever you went, you know, from top to bottom, people. His smile was ready for everybody. He took the club in its entirety to his heart and rebuilt it. And you can see, like, you know, things like the League Cup final against Chelsea. I thought he'd made a mistake and was bringing the mascots on rather than players because they were so young, but they played so brilliantly and fitted in so brilliantly because, you know, throughout the club, his ethos of how you play football was right the way through it, and he played with joy and heart and passion, and he wore his heart on the sleeve, and you know, and he connected with us as fans. And yesterday was very, very emotional for, you know, seeing him make that speech, and the whole crowd. Like 10 minutes before the game finished, the crowd were on their feet just singing a song, just, you know, and I was on top of my tan while I was on the ground.
So he did take the whole city to his heart, didn't he? Because he was very, very, very active in Alderhay Hospital, for instance. He did a lot of local charity work, and he really, it wasn't just the football club that he took him to.
I mean, the work he did in Alderhay Hospital, you know, that people don't even know about. The youngsters in there that he's gone and given his hug, once hugged, never forgotten. His hugs were extraordinary, and I was very thrilled to have received one.
And David, he had this very intense energy, didn't he? Running up and down the touchline, his glasses all over the place.
Yeah, I was sad when he lost his glasses. Actually, that was when he had his article. But yeah, I've never received a Jurgen Klopp. I have received the Sue Johnson, which. But yes, his energy and his passion. You know, he was never going to be someone who was a shrinking violet, and that's what we sort of connected with as well.
What was interesting? I'm sorry, David. I was just going to say that what was interesting yesterday was how quietly he just sat for the whole game, and the only time, and you know, everyone was chanting as well. I'm so glad Jurgen is a red. You know, it's.
So we've got on that lovely, almost political slogan. We've got to leave it there. Sue Johnston and David Morrissey, thank you both so much.
Our editor is Joshua Tindall. Smith. The studio director was Pete Wise from all of us. Goodbye.
BBC News at 9 o'clock. Iran has confirmed that its president Ebrahim Raisi was killed in a helicopter crash yesterday. Search teams have located the wreckage of the aircraft in a remote mountainous region close to the border with Azerbaijan. The foreign minister was also killed. Param Gobadi from BBC Persian says Mr. Raisi's crackdown on protests, which followed the death of a woman in police custody in 2022, made him a polarizing figure.
Overnight, before it was announced, we saw some of the supporters of the regime who were on the streets of Tehran holding a prayer for him. However, many Iranians are celebrating his death. For example, those who lost their eyes, those who lost a limb, and those who lost a loved one during the protests over a year ago, they've been posting pictures of celebrations over his death.
The final report of the public inquiry into the infected blood scandal will be published at lunchtime. More than 30,000 people were infected with HIV and hepatitis C between 1970 and 1991 after being given contaminated blood products and transfusions. The founder of WikiLeaks, Julian Assange, may find out today whether the High Court will allow his extradition to the US. He's resisted deportation for more than a decade. Pharmacists are warning of a problem in the supply of antibiotics to treat whooping cough. There have been 3 times as many cases reported in England so far this year as in the previous 12 months. The Department of Health said it was working with primary care across England to support the management of the outbreak. A new report claims shareholders in some of the biggest water companies have taken out tens of billions of pounds more than they've invested. Analysis by the University of Greenwich suggests 10 firms in England and Wales have paid tens of billions of pounds in dividends to shareholders since the industry was privatised. BBC News.
If you're in the mood for some coffee, cake and conversation, you can head to Cafe Hope in 45 minutes here on Radio 4, where today the chat is about a project that's keeping children off the streets of Belfast. As we've been hearing in the news, the final report into the infected blood scandal will be published today. Woman's Hour will be discussing that at 10. Now here's Start the Week with Tom Sutcliffe.
Hello. Sometimes pedigree, or provenance as it's called in the art world, is everything. When a group of American dealers bought a Renaissance painting of Christ at a New Orleans auction in 2005, they paid a little over $1,000 for it. It was dirty, damaged, a wreck. But the last time that painting changed hands at auction, the hammer price was $400 million. In between, it had been identified as a work by Leonardo da Vinci, Salvator Mundi. Art, whether it's old masters or contemporary work, can command astonishing prices, and those prices can make it hard to see art for what it is. With us this morning to talk about that, about art as tradable commodity and cultural treasure, are Orlando Whitfield, who's got all that glitters, described the rise and fall of a young art dealer who got just a little too creative with his deal making. Angelina Giovanni Aga, an expert in provenance, who helps reassure buyers that there's nothing unsettling in a work of art's life history. And the curator, Francesca Whitney Cooper, who's just bought Caravaggio's last painting to the National Gallery in London, a painting whose own fortune's been transformed since an Italian bank got it for a song in the 1970s. I take it, Francesca, that you would describe that painting now as priceless, which doesn't mean that it doesn't have a price, but it's not going to come up for auction.
Right, so in the context of the National Gallery or in museums, price is a very strange concept. You know, if we lend a work to an exhibition, if we borrow one for an exhibition, certainly if we buy a work to acquire for the collection, you have to put a price on it. But to a certain extent, it's fairly meaningless.
Do you have to put a price on it for insurance purposes?
Well, yeah, if a painting's travelling, we absolutely do. But what does that mean? Because if something happened, God forbid something were to happen to that painting, we can't replace it. I mean, it's irreplaceable.
Caravaggios do come up for auction, don't they? I mean, a couple have come up recently, but and then they disappear and they go into private sale and so on.
But you couldn't, you can't replace a work that's been in a public collection since the 1840s. You can't replace a work, even if something comes up, it's not to say that it's going to have exactly the same caliber, or quality, or provenance, or history. So it's a slightly funny thing. We sometimes talk about once we buy a painting for the National Collection, we never deaccession. So in a way, the price is, as soon as you bought it, it becomes almost irrelevant.
It remains, though, doesn't it, this rather paradoxical word, which at the same time as saying it has no monetary value, is saying it has enormous monetary value.
Well, the art market obviously places a very hefty importance on pricing. After every big auction, you get the tagline is usually how much profit came in. So the idea of priceless in the market is very much very tightly connected to the price of artworks. But there is a romanticized value to something being priceless, and I think that's mainly related to cultural heritage and how people perceive art rather than how the market perceives art.
Yeah, I suppose there literally are certain. The Sistine Chapel ceiling is priceless, it seems to me. It is not a commodity, it can never be sold, never be transferred in ownership. The idea of the priceless work of art, Orlando, would be anathema to the people you write about, because it is all about the price, isn't it?
Absolutely. Priceless doesn't exist in the world in which I work. It's a luxury whose purview is that of the museum world. Everything has its number in the contemporary art market.
Your book is about a friendship with a young art dealer called Inigo Philbrick, who rose very, very rapidly in the late noughties and then fell even faster 10 years later. How did you first meet him?
We met at Goldsmiths University in around 2006, 2007, where he was already destined, if not for greatness, then for notoriety.
Well, in his own mind, certainly, at the time. And he was just an art student, but already he was sort of looking for deals and kind of bringing you into that orbit.
Yeah, very quickly after we met, he suggested putting together a few art deals, and I didn't really know what that would look like, but he had an enormous wealth of knowledge from his family background. His father is still a curator, and his mother is an artist, and he'd been steeped in the contemporary art world for the whole of his childhood.
I mean, his father was a museum curator, so not, as it were, kind of strictly dealing in art.
No, but close to those people, and close to the patrons who funded the museum that his father ran.
So tell us about those early deals, because even when you were still at Goldsmiths as students, you were supposed to be doing kind of your work.
We got most of that done too.
You got most of it done, but you were also doing these little deals. Tell us about the first one, selling a Paul Arago watercolour. How did he come across it, and why did he think he could turn profit?
So Inigo lived in this extraordinary kind of genteel squat next to the British Museum, in a house which is in fact still owned by the British Museum, but whose lease has been held by a curator since the late 1970s, and the house has been this kind of residence for down and out curators, artists, filmmakers, designers, what have you. And Inigo found his way there aged 19, and one of the people he met there was someone who'd given Paul Arago her first show in London, her first commercial show in 1988. And he had bought a small watercolour for himself and was looking to sell it. He took it to the now defunct, very recently defunct Marlborough Gallery, and they offered him a paltry sum for it. And via someone that we had met at university, we knew a dealer in Portugal where Paul Arago is a rock star, and she has her own museum dedicated to her.
Rock star here as well.
Absolutely, but there's an actual Paul Arago museum just outside Lisbon, and we took it on a Ryanair flight, crack of dawn one morning, and sold it for €15,000 in cash, and then had the problem of having to fly home with this cash.
Two things are interesting about that story. One is that an art dealer is, as much as being a dealer in art, is a dealer in finance.
Absolutely.
So that's the crucial factor. They know who's got money and who's willing to spend it.
Very difficult. You're just a collector if you haven't got anything to sell it to.
Yeah. The other thing is, almost immediately you're on. You're smuggling the money. You're not taking all the customs and clearing it and paying whatever duty you feel payable. You're smuggling the money back. So right from the very beginning, the edges are clear.
Absolutely, yeah. But Inigo was always keen to see where the edges would take us.
You write this: to be a good art dealer, you need to be both prescient and manipulative. Is it possible to be a good art dealer without those two qualities? Can you just be prescient and honest and
well, I don't think that being manipulative precludes being honest. But you are selling things that nobody needs to people who are so rich they don't need to care, and so you do need to manage clients' expectations. I mean, at a later point in the book, that's something that Inigo quite forcefully reminded me of when we were doing a deal which almost went very badly wrong together. And he said, this is what you do as an art dealer, you have to manage your clients. And he was right.
You're creating a narrative which kind of encourages the buyer to buy and creates the notion that they're getting a bargain, all of that stuff.
Yeah, but also, I mean, the art market is interest rates were at almost historic lows, and there was an enormous amount of money swilling around in the art market. And there was at around sort of 2012 to 2015 a period of time where you could buy a painting from an East London gallery for £30,000 and take it straight to Phillips, and they would put it into their auction and sell it for £300,000.
This is the critical point. You explained very early on the difference between the primary market and the secondary market. Just explain that for the listeners.
So the primary market is any art that has been sold only once. It's sold by the gallerist who has worked with the artist to sell that work. The secondary market is any sale of that work after that.
And so, in a sense, the people operating in the primary market, you might expect to be more interested in art. You know, they love art. They want to nurture artists. Dealers in the secondary market are essentially commodity dealers, aren't they?
Yes, yeah, absolutely, yeah. But again, dealing with people's emotions as well as people's avarice, and I think that's become the complicated, the thing that has complicated the art market. And I say in the book, I think a lot of this, certainly in the public's imagination of the art market, starts with Charles Saatchi and his buying of the YBAs in the early 1990s, because he's buying these works for next to nothing and selling them for enormous sums of money.
Buying the entire collection, he goes to an exhibition and buys everything.
Exactly, and I think that's the point at which profit becomes synonymous with the art market in the public's imagination.
Now, the layman might think, when you get to the auction house, that the price an artwork commands there is, you know, a real-world expression of its commercial value. But what was interesting about your book is there's all sorts of things going on there too, aren't there? All sorts of manipulations.
Yeah, you can get people together in a room to bid up the price of an artwork if you maybe own other artworks by the same artist. There are, I mean, if you got caught, you would almost certainly not be allowed to bid again at that auction house. But it's very difficult to prove any kind of conspiracy, and there's no regulation in the art market which would stop that from happening.
And the auction houses themselves also have an incentive in keeping prices high, and
absolutely,
and ways in which to do that.
Of course.
Let's get to. He gets into trouble. Inigo. He starts off. He has this sort of stellar career.
Yeah.
He has his own gallery. He starts dealing. He gets into trouble. Sort of later on. Can we talk about the Stingel paintings, because the two Stingel paintings that he sells are where the problems really begin, or they illustrate how the problems begin. First of all, the Plan B has this damaged Stingel painting. These are commanding high prices, aren't they?
Yeah, and Inigo was so involved in the Stingel market that at one point he gave himself the nickname Stingel Damus. You know, he thought he could
predict
where he could foresee the Stingel market's ebbs and flows with such accuracy but sadly that didn't turn out to be the case for Inigo. The Plan B painting that you asked about was a painting that Inigo bought. It's a large gold painting which Inigo bought from an insurance company. It had been written off by the insurance company when it was damaged in a flood. And Inigo thought he could get a certain conservator to fix this painting. He was the conservator. He is the conservator, sorry, who works on Stingel's paintings most prominently. But this guy refused, and so Inigo was sort of stuck with this picture, which he had in a rather complicated fashion, which I think would be difficult to explain in the time frame we have here.
into various art funds which he had control
I
over.
do think it's important though to tell listeners, as it were, one of the problems was that he sold 220% of the painting because you can own bits of the painting.
So this,
Because it's in a warehouse, you never see it, you don't want to hang it on your wall, it's just an investment.
much like racehorse owning, you can own a leg of a racehorse, you can own a half share, a quarter share, 10% of the painting. And yes, of course, this is the point at which we are no longer talking about collecting, we're talking about investing.
And then we drift towards what essentially is a Ponzi scheme, isn't it? You take the profits from one.
Yeah, it's robbing Peter to pay Paul, but then Paul's getting robbed too.
Angelina, it is no surprise that people want to know where a painting has been, given all of that. That's what you do, isn't it? That's what your company does.
Yes. So when we set out, we wanted to just put together an offering that would exclusively help collectors, dealers, the trade, and museums to find out more about the ownership history of either works of art that they already own or works of art that are looking to be transacted. Luckily for us, there's not much need for in-depth provenance research in post-war and contemporary art. So we haven't, thankfully, had to, deal with people like Inigo.
It's very interesting because conceptual art is particularly prone to sort of replication, isn't it? You tell the story of Inigo having to show a work of art which he says he's bought, but he hasn't actually bought. It's by Felix Gonzalez Torres. It consists of 100 rubber welcome mats piled in a stack. He realises he hasn't got it. He sends off to America and just buys the rubber mats.
No, there were absolutely moments in which the fraud scheme that Inigo perpetrated dipped over into the realm of conceptual art.
So you don't deal with that, Angelina. That's not
Thankfully no. But it is really worrying because there is a pattern in the art market to sort of, let such problematic people get away with a slap on the wrist. Because Inigo went to prison for about 4 years, and now he's come out and is trying to educate the public about the bad level of education in the Bureau of Prisons in the US and how nobody seems to know what an art dealer is, which I don't think Inigo can teach them much.
A lot of white-collar criminals get into prison reform, don't they? Once they've been. Are you in a rising market too? There is more interest in provenance now, partly because of an anxiety about past ownership in museums. For reasons of sort of colonial acquisition or imperial acquisition. So there is more interest in.
There is absolutely more interest, and it's important to frame this in a positive viewpoint, as in you don't only need to do provenance research if you think you own something problematic. It's important to do provenance research at any point of your interaction with art, or if you're about to embark on a transaction, or it's always better to know.
You would say that because you're selling the service, but does it add?
It adds value, absolutely. It adds value ideally if the result of the research is positive. There's cases.
It adds intangible value as well as monetary value, because if you go with a provenance to sell it, it's much more reassuring to the buyer.
There's less risk, but we can never guarantee from the beginning of the process whether the end result is going to be in the favor of the buyer or not, because the most clean way to approach this is a service you offer to the artwork. So you enhance the history, you bring it a bit more out of darkness of the past and things. People have works of art that they've owned forever, and they don't quite know what they are. They've inherited them, they've grown up with them, and then only when they're about to part with them and sell them, they find out all these incredible things about it.
How do you go about your business? If I come to you and say, look, I'm interested in buying this painting, the dealer says it's a monk. It looks like a monk to me, but I don't know much about it. How do you go about business next?
Well, we have a lot of questions about you as to...
About me?
Yes, about how you acquired the work, why is it in your possession, and then we started put into a rather complicated process of a multi-tangential research. So we look at the ownership history. We very often collaborate with labs so that they can do the pigment testing and the different types of photography testing, and then we speak to a lot of monk experts. We liaise with the Monk Museum in Norway.
So there's connoisseurship, But then there's also kind of documentary, simple
Yes,
documentary
so
research.
there is provenance research, which is strictly the ownership history research and everything you can dig out. There is a technical analysis where you need the science to back up the claim of whatever attribution you're trying to give to a work of art. And then ultimately there's the opinion of the connoisseur, who is ideally placed to be the person who knows the most about a particular artist. So while the decision rests with the connoisseur, all these components need to align to tell the right story of an artwork.
Just the secrecy, I mean, it's a theme in your book as well. A lot of collectors are very secretive. They don't want people to know they're collecting because it is an investment. They're going to get a patent. They might make a large profit on it. So the secrecy must make it harder for you sometimes, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, we have a lot of, especially art market people who want us to sign NDAs before we look at the artwork they have. But then we have to tell them that, well, we are capable of carrying out this research just privately. I could just do it myself, but then you have to tell the client that you need to travel to Paris and New York and Brussels, and very quickly it becomes more of a too much of an expensive exercise, so they're happy for you to disclose parts of it to people who bring the cost down. So there's no reason for an NDA really when you're doing research and when you are very clear that the only reason you have this information is to carry out your due diligence and not shop it around for people to sell or.
I mean, that's the point, isn't it? That with provenance and with provenance research, there is obviously an ethical quicksand. You can see off in the corner there. I mean, people have gone into it famously. Bernard Berenson, famous art expert, Renaissance art expert, gave advice to Joseph Duveen, whose name is still in the tape there, in the Duveen galleries, and kind of sort of upped the pedigree of various works in order to sell them for American clients.
Yes, I think we try to separate connoisseurship from art dealing as much as possible. There are gaps in the market because there is unfortunately declining interest in old masters. So we find ourselves even frequently now with gaps where we're looking to identify certain connoisseurs or leading art historians on artists that might not be as famous as Caravaggio or the usual suspects. So it becomes increasingly harder to find scholars to assist with the project if we fully exclude old master dealers.
Yeah, that's the dream, obviously, that kind of fuels the popular view of this, like Fake or Fortune, Britain's
Yes.
Lost Masterpiece, is that you're going to find some work of art that's been lost. But do you sometimes find in doing provenance that you add value simply because of the collection that it has been in the painting?
Absolutely.
You know, if Kenneth Clark owned it,
Yes.
does the price go up?
I think it would be very difficult to say for a fact that if you name all the previous owners that the price will go up by a certain percentage, because it ultimately depends on who's in the room and what's being cooked in the room and what else is on the sale. But it helps reassure the buyer that they are buying that it's a solid investment, and knowing who it's been through and whose collection it's been in, it adds to a fascinating story. So it's always better to know.
When you're going through the archives, do you sometimes find pictures that have gone missing entirely?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I actually, I've been working on this very little known case of looted modern British paintings. It started during my master's thesis, and it's sort of stayed with me since, because obviously I wasn't able to solve it in about 6 months, and it's been a decade and I still haven't been able to fully solve it. But basically in 1940 there was a travelling exhibition that was organised by Wildenstein's Gallery in London to tour the French provinces, and this is everyone who's famous in the modern British art world: Vanessa Bell, Duncan Grant, Stanley Spencer, Augustus John.
Very big names.
Very big names, and they worked to launch this travelling exhibition. They went to France, and then obviously very soon France capitulated, so the paintings never came back to London, and they seem to have been discovered in the first look of the tour, which was in the Musée des Beaux-Arts tour, and 2 years later brought to Paris, and then for some very strange reason they end up with the German Navy.
Well, you need paintings, I suppose, in the wardroom, in the mess room.
Yes, absolutely, and that's a very likely explanation as to what likely happened to them. So I was very curious to see what happened to them after the war, and they seem to have few of them seem to have popped up in the market, but no one seems to know that there's this tiny little bit of their history that is actually really dark, but we don't associate art looted during World War II with modern British art.
No, absolutely not.
So to me, it's stuck with me, and it's very difficult to shake off because I'd like to find out.
There's some missing dots.
There's some missing dots.
You want
Yes,
to
I'm
connect.
looking to tell the story in writing, hopefully. So
Now, you say some of those paintings have re-emerged in the market,
Yes.
but not all of them. So some of them are
not all
still
of
out.
them. There was about 24 paintings in the exhibition. About 2 or 3 that turned up recently.
So there's a lot of.
It was a lot to find out.
Now, obviously, if one of those paintings emerged, you would want to have a decent provenance in order, if you wanted to sell it rather than keep it, you would want a decent provenance in order to be able to do that, which must lead to the temptation to make the provenance up. Is that a problem for you? Fake provenances as well as fake paintings?
I would say it is not in the context of the British paintings that I've been
Not
researching.
those ones.
Not those ones, only because there is no cause for concern for that genre and group of paintings in general. But yes, I mean, it has been known historically to happen, especially in the 90s with the aftermath of World War II and the raising concerns of Jewish collections being looted during World War II. There have been known instances where Jewish names in the post-war period have either been completely erased or they have been edited to sound less Jewish, or provenance gaps have been filled with names that just are purely never owned the work. So yes, there's a lot of that.
And the Beltrakis, tell me about them, because they were fakers. They faked the paintings,
Yes.
but they then also faked the provenance.
Yes, it's what my nightmares are made of, fake provenance trails.
How did they just explain how they went about it?
Well, his wife was partnering with him. Obviously, she collaborated in helping fake provenance evidence. So Beltraki would, let's say, paint a work of art in the style of an artist, and then his wife would dress up in period clothing, pretend she was her grandmother, and the painting would be hanging behind her in the kitchen.
So that they had documentary
So they had
photographs,
documentary
which they must have
evidence.
presumably aged as well.
Yes, he was incredibly smart, and to this day he has refused to disclose every single collector gallery auction that he has defrauded, and he's accepted to go to prison only for the crimes that he's actually been found guilty of, which shows a very arrogant level of confidence that you are not going to get caught. And if those artworks end up in major museums, you can understand,
He's obviously gone to a great deal of trouble. How was he eventually caught?
he was caught because he used a pigment that wasn't previously available. I believe it was titanium white in a painting that was supposed to date before titanium white was introduced.
A rookie error as far as a forger is concerned.
Yes,
you would have thought.
I think it was more a mistake. He had the tube laying around, and he
got careless.
Yes, I think he got careless. I don't think he didn't know per se.
Francesca Whitlam Cooper, Angelina says that's a nightmare for her, but it's a nightmare for any curator, isn't it? That notion that the work of art may not be what you think it is.
Oh my goodness, utterly terrifying. Utterly terrifying.
So
yes.
tell us a little bit. You have just bought The Martyrdom of Saint Ursula, which is said to be the last Caravaggio. I mean, certainly very, very late, wherever you place it. Tell us a little of the life story of that, because it wasn't, as it were, that physical object was not always regarded as the last Caravaggio.
No, so we now call this painting the last Caravaggio. Effectively, for probably about 100 years, it was a lost Caravaggio. So this is a painting which we know now that Caravaggio is working on in May 1610 in Naples. So this is literally 2 months before he dies. We know that because in 1980, a letter is discovered in the State Archives in Naples, which talks about that commission being finished. So there's a business agent in Naples writing to his boss in Genoa saying, I've got your painting, the St. Ursula by Caravaggio. Everyone who's seen it's amazing. Unfortunately for this business agent, he's kind of gone down in art history as the man who put a Caravaggio out in the sun to dry, which we wouldn't recommend for anyone working on paintings at home.
He writes he's rather anxious, isn't he, that he may have kind of
That
damaged it.
something funny's happened to the varnish, and he's got to get Caravaggio back round to work out, what it is and how to make sure he doesn't damage the painting. But effectively, what that gives us is a very, very precise date. It's quite unusual in Baroque painting that you know exactly on the 11th of May 1610 Caravaggio has finished a painting and he's given it to the agent in Naples.
Now, you say that letter came out in 1980.
Yes.
Before that, was this a picture that people thought was out there and they didn't know where it had gone?
No, not really. So as the painting's finished at the end of May 1610, it goes up to its patron in Genoa, and it remains there in the Doria collections, the Doria family collections, for a couple of hundred years. Initially, we know now that it's archived as St. Ursula by Caravaggio, blah, blah, blah. But over time, it loses that attribution. So it gets separated both from Caravaggio's name and from the subject matter.
And that's just a matter of paperwork, is it? That somehow it kind of gets separated from the catalogue that says that's what it is.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is. It's sort of, I don't want to call it a filing error, but it's just, these families have these big inventories, and over time, different artists assume different degrees of importance. So actually, in the 19th century, Caravaggio, superstar today, is not really that highly regarded. So it's not the kind of picture people are worrying about. It's not, at that moment, the most expensive painting in the collection. So it sort of tumbles into the sidelines.
That's a critical thing, isn't it, when we think about lost paintings, is we forget that they rise and fall in terms of their kind of assumed value. I mean, artistic value,
absolutely.
not just commercial value.
Yeah, and that taste changes, and that, Caravaggio now, I think it's impossible for us to imagine that Caravaggio in the late 19th, early 20th century is almost forgotten. I mean, he's not entirely forgotten. There's a Caravaggio painting in the National Gallery, his works are in museums, but it's just not, it's not the flavour of the month. It's not what people are interested in. It's not the kind of painting that people are interested in. So in the case of the Martyrdom of St. Ursula, by the time you get to the 1960s and 70s, it's still in an Italian private collection. It's acquired by the Banca Commerciale as a painting by Mattia Preti, who's a very kind of minor follower of Caravaggio from the generation.
But as it were, they thought, because that's the other element, isn't it? We think of Caravaggio as being inimitable, but of course he is highly imitable, and lots of people did.
Huge. I mean, and this is a great mark of his success, that as soon as his first public paintings go on view in the church of San Luigi dei Francesi in Rome in 1600, he is a sensation, and we know from contemporary biographies that young artists flocking to this church to look at these paintings, to copy him, his style, the immediacy of it, the fact of using real people with ripped clothes and dirty fingernails, the very dramatic compositions, the very exaggerated light and dark. That is immediately taken up by generations of artists, and it has this huge popularity. So as you say, we think he's inimitable now, but actually when you look back over the course of our history, there are lots of moments where Caravaggio's, what we would now see as fully attributed Caravaggios, were not considered to be such, and vice versa.
And intriguingly, those shifts in kind of valuation, and I'm talking both in terms of aesthetics and money, they can have nothing to do with the painting. I was, Artemisia Gentileschi. If you found a Gentileschi painting now, you would be very, very keen, I think, Angelina, for it to turn out to be Artemisia. 30 years ago, you would have been very, very anxious that it was her father Lorenzo. And that is a shift to do with our interest in women painters.
100%, and it's really interesting how that's changed. And thinking about kind of art fairs and art markets, there was a moment a few years ago where suddenly every Baroque painting that showed a woman at an art market was an Artemisia. I mean, they were not all Artemisias, but they were all possibly attributed to thinking about, because that was there was a moment where that was the kind of most important quality, and that again will change. None of these things are permanent. It's a very kind of shifting.
It's interesting, Orlando, isn't it, that's one of that Inigo Philbrick's prescience didn't quite stretch to that notion that a whole set of social values were going to come into play, and that people would be interested in diversity in art, they would be interested in women artists. He missed that trick, didn't he?
He absolutely did, and that was part of his downfall, is that he didn't see. He was absolutely convinced that this single painting of Picasso would go up for auction in May of 2019 and would make him enough money to get himself out of this horrible mess of frauds that he had tangled himself up in, and he didn't see that Inigo's markets, the ones in which he was really involved, were Christopher Wool, Rudolf Stingel, Wade Guyton, all white American European painters, and he didn't see that the market was changing. And because the art market really you only get to see the changes, as it were, in public seasonally when the auctions come around. And so if a change has kind of happened in amongst the people who are buying at these auctions between the auction seasons, then it can only become apparent months later.
Yes, I mean, he has a painting, doesn't he? I think it is a Stingel that just sort of performs disappointingly all of a sudden. It's quite the unthinkable thing is beginning to happen. The price is dropping instead of rising.
I think a previous painting, very similar work, also a black and white painting by Stingel, but it was a self-portrait, had sold, I think, the year before, maybe 18 months before, for in excess of $10 million. And Inigo thought that his painting, this extraordinary painting by Stingel of Picasso, would go for maybe between 12 and 15. He really thought it was going to fly, and it tanked.
And once
tanked at 5 and a bit million.
Yeah, no, but of course, but once that perception has got out, you're in trouble with that particular. If you're thinking of it as a commodity alone, rather than something you will value as an artwork. Just quickly, Francesca, you talked about the business agent. Are there dealers? Are there secondary market dealers in 1610, or are they virtually non-existent?
It's a really good question. I mean, there definitely are dealers, because we know that when Caravaggio goes down to Naples, he goes down to Naples famously because he's murdered a man, and for all the kind of celebrity in Rome and all his great protectors, they can't actually protect him against having, a death sentence on his head. So he flees down to Naples, and we know that quite quickly he's associated with two kind of artist dealers, Abraham Vink and Louis Finson. And it may be them who kind of help set him up with a studio, help kind of make some kind of artistic connections for him. In Naples, we know that later, after his death, when they return to the Netherlands, they're taking at least one, probably more Caravaggio paintings with them. So there absolutely is the kind of beginnings of that market. I think in my period, we tend to think in the 17th century that the art market is based in Amsterdam. By the 18th century, it's in Paris, then it's in London in the 19th century. It kind of follows the money.
It
really.
follows the money.
Yes.
It follows free money, doesn't
Yes.
it? And so where there are people who are kind of willing to buy, the art market will go there.
And that, to me, that's what's really interesting about thinking about Amsterdam in the 17th century as the centre of an art market. That most of Europe at that point has courts and largely Catholic monarchs and church commissions. Certainly that's why artists tend to be going to Rome in the 1600s, like Caravaggio did, because you want to get all those religious commissions. It's a huge amount of money in kind of painting for kind of public places. In the Netherlands, of course, they don't put paintings in churches, so there's a huge market for kind of private individuals and people who travel. British people who travel to the Netherlands in the 17th century are shocked to find that bakers have paintings and merchants have paintings.
But that's the very intriguing thing, isn't it? That even though that market begins to develop in Amsterdam, it's not like a tulip bulb market. People are buying the things because they want to put them on their wall and look at them.
Yes.
And have them as part of their life.
Yes.
Whereas you don't with a tulip bulb.
No.
You just want to pass it on to the next man at a profit.
Wait to see what it grows into.
But contemporary art, a lot of this contemporary art will sit in a Swiss warehouse, never appear on anybody's wall, because it is there solely as an investment vehicle.
Absolutely, and it can change ownership multiple times without ever leaving the Swiss warehouse, accruing value at each point, and of course accruing profit for the dealer who is selling it.
It would be horrifying if we don't actually talk about the Caravaggio just as a work of art before we finish. We really must do that, because it is all about more than money. And the wonderful thing about that show is it's free. So and a work of art does not know whether you own it or not.
No.
It gives itself freely to anybody who stands in front of it, and there is no VIP area where it's showing something to people with money that people without money can't see. So just talk about that painting. I mean, it is an extraordinary. He's taken that subject, which is often a big screen epic, and made a tiny little
He has.
I mean, it's
So
a big picture, but it's
It's a big
it's a
picture.
close-up, isn't it?
It is. And I think it's one of the reasons we talk about Caravaggio being very cinematic. So the story is the story of St. Ursula, who is a British or Breton princess who famously travels to Rome with 11,000 virgin followers, and they're massacred by the Huns. And the king of the Huns, the prince of the Huns, gives Ursula an ultimatum and says, "I've killed all your followers, but I'll save your life if you marry me." Now, I think one of the reasons, going back to what we were saying before about why that painting became separated both from Caravaggio's name but also from the identification as Ursula, is that most artists have depicted that story thinking about quantity. I mean, it's quite hard to avoid the lure of 11,000 virgins, so you get kind of battlefields strewn with all these dead women. And Caravaggio's done completely the opposite. He has given us a very tightly cropped, up-close, personal scene. There's kind of, it looks as if there are 5 people there. I think there's probably 7 actually, looking at the kind of helmets in the background, in a very enclosed space, and everything is playing out across a very small amount of space. So you have on the left the Prince of the Huns, who's just fired a fatal arrow.
It is the decisive moment, as they say
It
in
is.
photography, isn't it? That the exact moment of her martyrdom.
It is, and Martin Scorsese, the director, who's a great fan of Caravaggio, talks about Caravaggio as you come into these paintings in the middle of the action, and it is exactly that. It's a kind of freeze frame. So the fatal arrow has just been fired. There is a bystander between the Prince of the Huns and Ursula, whose hand is desperately reaching out to try and prevent it. Ursula herself is framing this fatal wound in her chest. I mean, we're literally looking at her in the moments in which she's dying. It's
Well,
very
she has a look of sort of slight astonishment, but it's that it doesn't hurt yet. You know, it's that's
Yeah.
how instantaneous it is.
and it's a choice, you know, it's something she's choosing.
Have you seen it, Angelina?
Yes.
You've been to see it. Yeah.
Yes, it's wonderful, and I think part of the allure of old masters is that we need to keep on the ability to be able to read them and to interpret them and to be familiar with the subject matter, and subject matter plays a vital role in provenance. Being able to identify something correctly, a theme, and then analyze and consider what its possible titles might be and what it's previously been referred to is really crucial to the tracing exercise.
It would be quite difficult in this case to know that it's St. Ursula, wouldn't it?
Absolutely.
Just from the image itself.
It's a really uncommon way of doing it, and especially if you imagine that painting under really thick yellow varnish, really dirty, and you're only seeing it in a small black and white photo, as most art historians up until the kind of 80s were, you'd miss that Caravaggio's included his own self-portrait in it. You know,
Well,
easy
yeah.
to do, perhaps.
Yes, well, of course, that's the kind of the intangible, isn't it? Once you know it's a Caravaggio, you think, oh, that must be Caravaggio.
It is
But until you know it's a Caravaggio, it might just be
Exactly.
a bystander. Can you explain one thing to me, just quickly? The enormous difference between the bystanders and the Huns' king's complexions and Ursula's.
Yes.
She looks as though she's made out of marble. It's as though she's instantaneously been converted into a memorial for herself.
Yep.
Pale.
She's very, very pale. It is, as we've said, with the history of being put out in the sun, it's a painting that's had a complicated conservation history. However, that pallor, and Caravaggio's pallor as well, actually, because he's also very pale.
He's more sallow, though, isn't he?
But he looks ill to me. But yes, that pallor for her, I think, is absolutely a deliberate decision. And to me, there's often something metaphorical about the light in Caravaggio. So, however awful that martyrdom is, it is something she's choosing. I think there is something about the kind of light of faith, as opposed to the darkness of everyone
She's
around.
already becoming a
Yes.
saint. We have limited time, I'm afraid. Thank you to all of my guests, the art historian and provenance expert Angelina Giovanni Maga, Orlando Whitfield, his book Art Glitters is out now, and Francesco Whitman Cooper, curator of the last Caravaggio National Gallery. It's there till mid-July. Do go if you can. Many thanks to today's studio engineer, Duncan Hannah. Next week, Kirsty Walk is joined by Marilyn Robinson for a Bible. For now, thank you and goodbye.
Start the Week was presented by Tom Sutcliffe and produced by Katie Hickman. Now, if those figures aren't making sense, there's help on the way this Wednesday here on Radio 4.
I'm Tim Harvey. Here at More or Less, we're your weekly guide to the numbers and statistics in the news and everyday life.
The average weekly shop, £110 more.
32.6 million GP appointments. 90% of fish and chip shops were selling shark.
And when those numbers don't seem to add up, we're here to crunch the calculations.
I did look at some data.
No question your number is too big or too small, from the entire government budget to thousands of missing cats. The new series of More or Less with me, Tim Harvey, starts on Wednesday morning at 9 on BBC Radio 4 and on BBC 7.
In Quarter of an Hour, Woman's Hour is discussing the long-awaited report into the infected blood scandal. Nuala McGovern will be speaking to Claire, who's been campaigning for years for the wives and partners who became infected with HIV to be heard. That's at 10. Now it's Cafe Hope with Rachel Bergman.
Hello and welcome back to Cafe Hope, our virtual meeting place, a little corner for coffee, cake and conversation. We hope it's somewhere people can let off a bit of steam and open up about the challenges they faced in their lives, but also the way the human spirit can respond to those moments, and sometimes, in the case of our guests here, turn it into something good, something transformative. There is enough bleakness in the world, and one thing I can tell you is that all our visitors will leave you with a bit of a lift, and I know the next guy coming in the door fits that bill. Hi David, all the way from Belfast, how are you?
I'm very well, good morning, how are you?
Yeah, great to have you here with us. Can I get you tea, coffee, cake?
Cake, please.
Cake? Straight in there. I've not heard such enthusiasm. I'll sort it out. Is lemon drizzle okay?
I'll be right there, yeah.
Perfect, alright, coming your way right now. We talk about transformation. Actually, Belfast is, of course, a city that's transformed itself in recent years. What's it like growing up there as a teenager these days compared to how it was when you were younger?
Oh, these days it's bliss. When I was younger, obviously I lived the whole 30 years of the troublesome woman. Now it's a more settled, more shared space. Economically, clinically it's changing. The infrastructure is improving. It's a lovely place to live.
Now that doesn't mean to say that there aren't challenges for young people there, and that was something that you became aware of a number of years ago.
It was, and a lot of those challenges still remain today that existed back then, and that's mental health issues within young people, obesity levels rising, homelessness in young people, suicide rates increasing, and I say that's, if anything, from when I was a child, it's actually more evident today.
Why do you think that is, David, when on the surface, as you say, the city is much more settled and at ease with itself?
I think it's lack of resources. There are a lot of mental health units and mental health wards in Northern Ireland as a general are actually closing down. They don't have the capacity, they don't have the nurses, they don't have the funding, and it's just, sometimes just people feel that they walk into a brick wall every time they look for help.
And you know what this feels like. You had your own mental health struggles, didn't you?
I did. It must be 15, 18 years ago now. I tried to take my own life. Woke up in the Ulster Hospital saying to myself, what on earth have you got yourself in this position for? But looking at where I was, I knew it wasn't just me. There are many other people like that, even today in Northern Ireland, specifically young people. So I created the concept of Belfast Child, added in the social inclusion part and the cross-community part, and focused on healthier, fitter, more unified young people within Belfast.
And that seems an extraordinary personal journey for you, but what was it then that got you through those dark moments, that moment in the hospital where you thought, I've got to do something for myself here?
It all comes through the name, Child. That's where Belfast Child came from, because you can have your houses, you can have your cars, you can have all the luxuries, but if you don't have your children, you don't have anything. So that's where my focus came.
But you've got to get yourself right first as well, haven't you?
A lot of people, even to this stage, say that the organisation, being 11 years now unpaid, must drive you insane, but to be totally honest, without it, I would be insane.
Was it one child that you wanted to help, or was it a specific service you felt you could provide?
It's a specific service, but if we can help one child, then we've done it. But say we have 170, 200 visits into our premises every week. Say I still work as a support worker for a homeless community. That's my paid job, but our organisation is open 7 days a week. So the days I'm not there, I'm in our organisation.
Goodness me. So you came up with the name, you came up with the concept. What was the next step?
Time to fund it.
That's a pretty big step.
Yeah. Well, the first thing I did was to come up with the concept of actually how to generate our own money. So I got our own branded bottles of water made, which actually said Belfast Child on them. So I actually went around to all the shops in Belfast and asked them to actually sell our bottles of water, and in return that they would make a donation of the proceeds back to the organisation. The issue with that was there's a very little profit margin coming back to us because the businesses actually have to make money. So what I did then was spoke to the police about getting something that was called a peddler's license. So that actually allowed me then to go door to door and actually sell bottles of water with our name on it. That got us a lot of recognition. Take it forward 6-7 years and we had employed 85 young people and trained them up to be many salespeople to do exactly the same job. And actually that got us in 2015-16 to the final of the Northern Ireland Social Enterprise Awards 2 years in a row for trade, education and employment.
So you're going door to door selling bottles of water, and that generates enough income for you. But part of that process is also giving an opportunity to the young people who really need it, who otherwise wouldn't necessarily get an opportunity.
100%. It's all about creating jobs, it's all about trading, it's all about education. It's all about inspiring and giving young people confidence and the belief in themselves to go and knock on someone's door and talk to someone and explain about who the organisation is.
And what are you doing with that money then when that comes along? How are you spending it? Where's it going?
To pay the bills, like the electric, the overheads, the rent.
Because you have a base, don't you?
Yeah, we currently now, 11 years on, we've a 5,000 square foot facility in Belfast City Centre.
Wow. And who comes through your doors? Who decides that this person needs your help, your support?
Most of the work that we do will come through referrals, like to the Belfast Trust, to like of education authorities, like of homeless charities, disability charities, detention centres. Everything's done on a referral basis. Unfortunately, we're not a private sector operation, so it's like you can't just walk into our facility. Everything, just from a safeguard point of view, has to be done through referral or recommendation.
What was your primary focus when you started this? Was it about just providing a safe space? Was it about sports programs? Was it about training? What was it?
All of the above. The paramount aspect was physical and mental well-being. We do boxing, we do jiu-jitsu, we do MMA, we do Muay Thai, we do health and well-being classes, we do nutrition, healthy eating classes. All our walls right across it says shared space. In Belfast, in some areas it's still quite divided. So this is creating somewhere central whereby young people from all areas, all backgrounds can actually come in and actually use our safe space.
And the classes are very accessible in terms of their low cost. You try and make sure that anyone who really needs them can access them.
That's what it's all about. Because you can't differentiate between those people who have money and those who don't. Because that way you'll actually push away the ones that you're actually targeting. We have classes where young people don't pay anything.
It must be tough sometimes because I guess you can't reach every single child. You can't change every single life that comes through your door. Do you find that difficult?
We do find it difficult because we're stretched beyond capacity. We can only really deliver what we can do ourselves. We've always said if we had the backing financially from larger organisations, imagine what we could do. This is what we've actually done ourselves. All the maintenance is done by me, all the cleaning for most part is done by me. I take the vast majority of the costs to keep the cost down. It's just one thing, you just have to find answers.
This feels like a total life commitment from what you're telling me, David.
100%.
How many hours a week are you working in total then, including Belfast Child?
I wouldn't even like to write that down and let my wife see that.
I bet. When do you see your wife?
After 8, after half 8.
Oh my goodness. So how does she cope with that?
It's my fault. It's pretty much, it's your baby. Do you know what I mean? It's your project. She knows I'm never going to walk away from it, so she's acceptable of that. But I'd rather I did give it away many years ago.
It's tough. It puts pressure on a family, this kind of thing.
It does.
That's the downside. What are the upsides? Can you tell us about any particular stories or children who've been through your doors that make all of that feel worthwhile?
Many of them actually come at different stages of their journey, but it's actually when you see young people going from I can't do that or I won't try that till look at me, I just did that. It's inspiring them to get employment or education when they've just left school with no plans in place. One person in question, he came to us 7-8 years ago just on a work placement, and we really had 2 jobs and he's working those 2 jobs still, but he still on his days off comes back so it actually helps us. And when people ask him why do you do that, because he doesn't get paid either. It's like, well, Davey gave me a chance whenever nobody else would, so why wouldn't I be paid a favour?
It must feel sometimes like you are stepping in where society has failed.
100%. It is. The same issues in Northern Ireland are the same issue.
Så det videre snart for helt conva porque te-am văzut. Nu știu dacă mai văzut aici lângă Tottenham.
Well, just so we can understand how much this means to people that you have helped, I wanted to play you a voice note that was sent in to us.
Hi Dave, it's Jordan. Just want to let you know how much Belfast Child means to me and what it's done for me. It's really helped me out throughout the years. I've been with you nearly 8 years now. It's got me from being down and out to working 4 different jobs. It's helped me progress in my life. It's helped me with my autism. It's helped me interact with people. It's helped me understand people better and how to act around people. Very beneficial in my life. You were there when I needed somebody the most, and it's got me out of a lot of trouble in the past. It's got me back into sports. Makes me excited about life in the future. Thanks for everything you've done for me, Dave, in the past 8 years. It really means a lot.
That's an amazing response to hear. How does that feel, David?
It feels good, but none of us do it for the recognition. We just do it because it needs to be done.
To hear from somebody who clearly had been facing multiple challenges, and you were the opportunity for that person to discover themselves and make their lives so much better. That's extraordinary.
It is, and I can't get rid of them.
It's a nice problem to have, though, isn't it?
It is. It is. He's an asset, honestly. There's like days where I'm working in my day job, he would step in if he's not working and he'd cover just to make sure everything's okay in my absence.
What do you say to people who are listening who are thinking, oh, this is crazy? Why do you commit so much time to this?
Because it's just one of them things you can't run away from. The problem still exists today. The problem will exist in 10 years' time. So all we have to do is create more individuals like the other person you just heard from, who are thankful for the help that they actually receive.
What would you say to the younger David who was in that hospital bed those years ago at your lowest point, from what you know and have learned now?
Things happen for a reason.
Da, din cauza părului de pe față nu mai văzut, cred că. Da, rotativă nu mi-au dat nimic. Este ceva de muncă, dar trebuie să aștept. Peste 4 săptămâni plec înapoi, după cum am programat vacanțele și mi le-au aprobat chiar. Și atunci nu știu dacă o să-mi dea rotativ. Asta e, merg după cum bate vântul. Est, vest, nord, sud, mai vede. Va fi o vară incendiară.
Privileged to meet you.
Not a problem at all.
Thank you, David Boyd from Belfast Child. It blows my mind how much time, effort and energy people like David put into their projects. And I think you've been blown away by some of our guests too. Loads of emails coming in to cafehope@bbc.co.uk. Like this for Graham Burton, who helps run drone searches for lost dogs. Ben says, I heard this brilliant work by Graham. And Steve agrees, who just says, what a lovely chap. And you've been telling us about the projects that you've been involved in, like this from Louise at Lindholm Oldmoor Management Group. Now, she has started a community project to help grow a special kind of moss to kickstart the restoration of a local moor. What they want to do is create a carbon sequestering habitat full of biodiversity. She says they've taken small samples of this special peat building mosses and volunteers propagate them in a new mossery. They then want to grow the numbers of moss plants and ultimately help start the process of rebuilding the peat. She says we see this as our way of doing something positive and practical to reduce carbon emissions and reverse biodiversity loss. It's really lovely hearing about all your stories. So please do continue to email us, cafehope@bbc.co.uk. And we'll see you next time.
Cafe Hope was produced by Uma Dore-Swami and Nikki Edwards. The news is coming up in a moment, after a word about a series starting later this morning here on Radio 4.
The travel industry is booming. Global tourism is on the rise, and I'm not surprised. The excitement of discovering a new place is a feeling like no other. But here's the thing. Are we ruining the natural beauty, local communities and attractions we seek out so keenly? I'm Rajan Datar. Having explored the world, I'm now exploring how we can stop over-tourism, protect destinations and the environment from the negative impacts of travel. The Tourist Trap, with me, Rajan Datar. starting this morning at 11 on BBC Radio 4 and BBC Sounds.
BBC News at 10 o'clock. Iran has confirmed the death of President Ebrahim Raisi, who was killed along with his foreign minister in a helicopter crash yesterday. The wreckage was found on a remote mountainside near the border with Azerbaijan. During Mr. Raisi's time in office, he faced calls for an investigation into his alleged role in the mass executions of political prisoners in the 1980s. Here's our international editor, Jeremy Bow.
Raisi had many enemies. There will be plenty of people who will be very happy that he's dead. In Iran, there's always a reflex that you blame Israel. Israeli officials have been saying to Israeli journalists, they've said nothing on the record, but they're saying, look, they're not involved. And it is hard to see why Israel would benefit from what would effectively be a very provocative act of war.
The final report on what's been described as the worst treatment disaster in the history of the NHS is due to be published this lunchtime. Tens of thousands of people were infected with HIV and hepatitis C after they were given contaminated blood products and transfusions in the 1970s and 80s. The Prime Minister is expected to make an official apology. The High Court is due to give a final decision on whether the WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange can be extradited to the US. He faces charges of sharing classified information about the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. The public spending watchdog, the National Audit Office, says the government has no clear timetable for completing new post-Brexit controls at the UK's borders with the EU. Official estimates suggest the process will end up costing at least £4.7 billion. The government says it is making good progress. The French disability charity has said it's absolutely scandalous that more hasn't been done to improve accessibility on the Paris metro network ahead of the Paralympics this summer. APF France Handicap called the city's underground system a black spot on its Paralympic legacy. BBC News.
Maria Callas was known to her fans as La Divina, the Divine One. In Great Lives at 3 o'clock this afternoon, Harriet Harman tells Matthew Paris why the opera star fully deserved the title. Now it's Woman's Hour with Nuala McGovern.
Hello and welcome to Woman's Hour. Well, in a moment, an interview with a woman who has, in her words, been traumatised by the infected blood scandal. Due to it, her husband died of AIDS and she has HIV. Her story is coming up in advance of the release of the final report of the public inquiry. And feminist theatre turns 50, which is an achievement. But how is it defined and what is there still left to do? I'll be speaking to my guests in studio this hour. We'll also be in Edinburgh to hear about the street stitchers, the antithesis to fast fashion, repairing and restitching on park benches in the city. And also, what was it like to have Anita Pallenberg, the actress, model, style icon, and at times heroin addict, as your mother? We're going to speak to her son this hour. You can text the programme, the number is 84844, and anything you hear in our discussions on social media, we're at BBC Woman's Hour, or a WhatsApp message or voice note. That number is 03 700 100 444. As I mentioned, the long-awaited final report of the public inquiry into the infected blood scandal will be published later today. Now, the inquiry was announced in 2017. This was after years of campaigning by victims and their families. It's chaired by Sir Brian Langstaff. The inquiry will investigate the systemic failures over why men, women and children were given blood and blood products that were infected with HIV and hepatitis C. And this was from the 1970s through to the early 90s. Approximately 30,000 people were infected, more than 3,000 have died, and one person is estimated to die every 4 days in the UK. Those affected received infected blood via transfusion, such as women following childbirth, for example, or people with haemophilia, that was predominantly males, and others with bleeding disorders who received contaminated blood products. Around 1,250 people with bleeding disorders, including 380 children, were infected with HIV. Fewer than 250 of them are still alive today. Some transmitted HIV to their partners. Claire Walton gave evidence to the inquiry, and she has been campaigning for years for the wives and partners of those who became infected. She wants them to be heard and acknowledge. I spoke to her a little earlier this morning. I began by asking Claire about how she was feeling about the release of this report.
Huge anticipation about what's about to be revealed to the greater public. Of course, we know what's been going on for the last 40 years, but it'll be interesting to hear, directly from Sir Brian Langstaff, who's going to be reporting on what he's been investigating for the last 6 years, because this is about the truth. This is Sir Brian Langstaff has spent millions. This is millions of pounds of public money trying to get to the bottom of a scandal that should have been dealt with when it happened, and it's decimated people's lives, not just because of what happened, not because of the infected blood products, in my case with my husband who was a haemophiliac. This has been going on in my life for 40 years, but it could have been dealt with. And on top of that, we've then got the whole many years of the cover-up of the way we were treated, which is part of the investigation as well, is how governments reacted. And I'm bothered because of the way we have been treated in the past, whether it will just, whether the cover-up will just cover up again. That's
near third.
Yeah, but we may have our day today. Today will be the day when the news is there, the press is there, the media, the public are being, some for the first time, really understanding what went on. But then it's kind of, where will we be in a year's time?
Let's go back 5 years to 2019. You were one of the first to give evidence to the inquiry then. What was your thinking behind that?
It was really important that I, as someone who was infected through my husband, was acknowledged and the evidence was put into the public domain, because until that time, and still, when the scandal is mentioned, we hear there's 1,253 haemophiliacs were infected with HIV, and also they also would have had hepatitis C, it turned out as well. But you don't hear that of that, many wives were infected. You just don't get that figure. And in fact, there was a press release that went out at the time with one of the lawyers I was with at that time. I'm not with them now, but they put a press release out saying 1,253 haemophiliacs were infected with HIV, and HIV that went on to develop AIDS. There's only sort of a couple of, whatever it was, about 200 or 300 that were left alive at that time. More have died since. And I said, we've not mentioned the fact that wives were infected. But we knew a figure roughly about 70 wives. But again, we haven't really got the proper figures. And I was told it's a press release, and you have to make the press release snappy. And I said, is not the deaths of 31 million, which was a figure at that time, snappy enough? And that's where my whole feeling, and I'm still watching it this morning, I've watched the TV, we talk about 1,253 haemophiliacs infected, over 1,200, 300 of which were children. It was terrible, but not mention the fact that the wives.
Can we speak about your story, Claire? Your husband, as you've mentioned, had the blood disorder haemophilia. You got married young, and when you were 23, and then a couple of years later, he was told that he had HIV, the AIDS virus. That's how it was put to you back then. What was he told about how he contracted it and the prognosis?
He was told it's through the blood product factor. He was told that's how it affected, because by that time it was beginning to be known. I was actually 21 then. And yes, so it was 1983. In fact, tomorrow would have been our 41st wedding anniversary. So that's what I'm saying. So in 1983, we started to hear the rumours of AIDS. Well, so don't worry about it. But by early 1985, he was called into the hospital for his haemophilia and he was given a prognosis that the diagnosis that he'd been given, what was known then as the AIDS virus, HDLV3. It wasn't even called HIV.
That's correct, actually, yes, indeed.
And then he was told you've got probably 2 or 3 years left to live. And that was it. It was it.
You were so young. How did both of you cope at that time? What do you remember?
we were just stunned. We didn't have any support. We were just basically, there's a, as I've said before, here's a diagnosis, here's a prognosis. Forget about it. There was nothing. There was no follow-up. There was no aftercare. And this is the thing that I've discovered through the inquiry, which was quite shocking, is that people have asked us, what counselling did we get? What was the support? Today, what you've been given this devastating news. I was 23, he was 26. And people have asked us over the years, what counselling did we get? This was the 80s, people didn't get counselling. The way we have been treated has been appalling.
You were caring for him, your husband, then 2 years later in 1987, through him, you also tested positive for HIV, as I understand it. But it was your husband who told you the news? Can you explain that to us?
Yeah, we've been testing, as I said, it's in the evidence I gave at the inquiry. They've been testing me, and we decided we couldn't cope. We just took off on a holiday that we really couldn't afford. On the flight on the way over, flying over, I turned to Brian, my husband, and I said, I never got the results of the test. And he said, oh yes, I did. They told him.
They told him?
Not me.
Why?
Again, this is the way we were treated. It's a very...
But that's so many questions about that, Claire. I mean, in the fact that it went to him instead of to you, just even thinking privacy, medical concerns, but also just on a personal level, you've got the rest of that flight with your husband Brian to try and understand what this means.
Trying to understand what's happened to me over the years, it's been trauma on trauma on top of trauma. And again, you asked me why I gave evidence at the inquiry.
Yeah.
One of the things is to have this acknowledged that what happened to my husband, the people who died in this are the ones that have suffered the most, clearly. People who have, to watch the pain that they went through, to have those early years of dying of AIDS, and then also as what we're known as concordant couple, in that both of us are infected, there's a different dynamic. He was really worried about me as in his last part of his life, and he stood with me in the kitchen and said, I'm really worried about you. What's going to happen to you when I die? Because he knew he was dying. And I said to him, he'll be all right, And I think, to this day, I don't know if I just wanting to help him. He died within that week. I think he needed permission to kind of go. But out of that, so he was worried about me, I was worried about him. So my own health wasn't being tended to or cared for. But out of that, then it's how we were treated as a widow within the system, how we were not supported, and that's part of what I'm hoping Sabine will report on.
And your husband Brian, you died at just the age of 34 in 1993, so we are 31 years since that happened, and I'm so sorry for your loss. But I do remember that time, moving through the 80s and 90s, at the time when I was growing up as well. There were ads that were terrifying about AIDS. They were, in public spaces. They showed tombstones, for example. They talked about it being a deadly disease. There was so much stigma around it. How was it trying to live through that, care for your husband, while also knowing you have the virus yourself?
I think we just shut down. We shut ourselves in. We shut ourselves away from society. We didn't go on to, I think that's it. One of the worst things, I didn't have children. People really wanted to have a family. So I have no family. It's another problem. But at the time, and over the years, it was the silence and not being able to talk to it that actually traumatised people. And maybe they did it, basically dehumanised us. Another reason for giving evidence is for people to realise just how badly, how appallingly a group of people were treated. How society would look upon people with HIV, and people were losing their jobs, people were not getting the support they really needed. Discrimination, that was really, really difficult. Really, really difficult time. But for myself to cope with that, I've often thought, how did we cope?
Yes, that's what I'm
How
wondering.
on earth did I cope? But I worked in archives and I spent my life in a very quiet world, and I worked very much alone.